Welcome to a Legendarium special about Gore, Ghouls, and grave robbers. This is the story of the New York Doctors' Riot of 1788. In the United Kingdom of the Georgian era, many British feared that dissection after death would leave their bodies mangled come Judgment Day when God raised the dead. So government officials banned human dissections, offering just a few executed criminals per year to medical schools. The authorities saw offering heinous criminals up for dissection as extending punishment into the next world. However, medical schools simply did not have enough corpses to study. Given the lack of bodies, British anatomists obtained corpses by illegal means, usually robbing graves. Sometimes they enlisted their students as co-conspirators, swearing them to silence at the beginning of the semester. The United States inherited many British traditions, including the prejudice against dissections and the medical penchant for robbing graves. After the American Revolution, distrust of medical researchers grew widespread, especially in New York City. In the winter of 1788, the city buzzed with stories about the sick being experimented upon and medical students robbing graves to get bodies for dissections. Most of these robberies occurred in a cemetery reserved for the city's blacks. If the doctors only stole the corpses of black people, then few others cared. However, on February 21st, 1788, the New York Advertiser claimed that the body of a white woman vanished from Trinity Churchyard. Suddenly, many people cared. There are different accounts of how the riot began outside New York Hospital. In some versions, a group of boys saw a severed arm hanging outside one of the hospital windows to dry. In another version, a boy climbed a ladder and peered into the dissecting room, where a surgeon waved the severed arm of a corpse at him. What is known for certain is that the boy hurried to his father, a widower mason, and told him what he saw. The mason became convinced that the surgeon had stolen the corpse of his dead wife. He then gathered a mob which marched on New York Hospital. Young students fled, one hiding in a chimney, as the mob ransacked the hospital. The mob supposedly found one fresh corpse boiling in a kettle and two others being cut up. Rioters dragged each corpse into the street and burned them. If not for the arrival of Mayor James Dewan and the city sheriff, the mob may well have burned the surgeons alive as well. Mayor Dewan brought several doctors to the prison, the only building strong enough to withstand an angry mob for the doctors' own safety. Rioters searched the city for doctors, medical students, and corpses. Hundreds descended on Columbia University, despite the efforts of Alexander Hamilton, who pleaded with the crowd from the school's front steps to spare his alma mater. The mob answered Hamilton's pleas by hurling him aside and searching the anatomical theater, museum, chapel, library, and even students' bedrooms for signs of illegal dissection. Finding no bodies, the men searched several other doctors' homes and again found nothing. Unappeased, more than 5,000 rioters gathered at the jail, armed with stones, bricks, and timber torn from a nearby gallows. They tore down the jail's fence and besieged the prison, shouting, "Bring out your doctors!" Governor George Clinton, Mayor Dewan, and other notables urged them to disperse, but the crowd refused. Inside, the medical students climbed over the broken glass and used the rocks and bricks thrown at them to fend off their attackers. One rioter climbed inside the jail through a ground floor window only to be killed by a guard. Governor Clinton called out the state militia, although they had strict orders not to fire their muskets. They called in Revolutionary War hero Baron von Steuben, who pleaded with the crowd to keep the peace. They replied by throwing a brick at his head. As von Steuben staggered back, bloody and dazed, he called on the mayor for permission to order the militia to open fire. While not actually an order, the already frightened militia simply heard the word fire, aimed their muskets, and shot into the crowd. Suddenly, warfare erupted in the streets of New York. The rioters tried to hold their ground, but the soldiers' firepower quickly overwhelmed them. It is not known how many died, but by some reports, 20 people lay dead in the street by the time the smoke cleared. A riot started over one corpse, ended with many more. In the days that followed, local newspapers stopped running ads for medical classes. People often went to the cemeteries to inspect graves and formed armed groups known as Dead Guard Men to protect the cemeteries which housed their loved ones. The standing of the medical profession did not recover for generations. New York's might be the most famous, but this is hardly the only time that Americans rioted against the medical profession over real or imagined dissections. At least 17 American anatomy riots took place before the Civil War. Locations included Boston, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and St. Louis. In response to this violence and continued pleading from doctors for more corpses to dissect, many states passed anatomy acts, or bone bills. These bills allowed medical schools to secure unclaimed corpses from hospitals and poorhouses. Yet rumors of grave robbing and dissection-related scandals continued into the 20th century before they finally disappeared from the newspapers' front pages. Today, the illegal harvesting of organs and tissues fuels medical science horror stories, so perhaps our fear of the grave robber has not yet gone quietly into the night. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.